advantage of this war and actually listened to the digital audience, not a music label, an outsider. Apple said to consumers, you want convenience, you want choice, you want a mobile device for your MP3s? Well, here it is. And then, in 2003, Apple put the record store online. It offered unbundled, easy access, virus-free, downloadable songs. Apple told the industry that the price had to be 99 cents per song. Apple calculated that the digital audience would find that fair, even if it meant living with Apple's digital rights management and being locked into Apple's devices. The desperate labels felt they had to accept Apple's pricing. They cannibalized their revenue stream, exchanging retail dollars for digital pennies. They sold online rights cheaper than the big stores could sell CDs, hoping that volume would make up for lower margin. It didn't. In 2008, iTunes became the top US retailer of music. In 2010, iTunes sold its 10 billionth song. Today, it accounts for 70% of worldwide online digital music sales, which is a tiny percentage of all of the copyright-protected files that are exchanged on peer-to-peer sites. And what has this catastrophe taught the music industry? Consider this. On the one hand, in July, this coming July, through its new acquisition, Lala, Apple will start using cloud computing to stream music from the internet. But at the same time, Universal Music, the old, will be testing whether maybe $10 is the magic price where people will gladly buy CDs. The digital audience is a decade into the 21st century, but the music industry is still trying to turn back the clock. There's iTunes. Now let's turn to how the digital audience transformed another sector of the entertainment industry, publishing, or specifically newspapers. Newspaper readers enthusiastically embraced a digital publishing model for papers, but the newspaper industry failed to figure out a digital business model to monetize their products online. The results have been catastrophic. This was the model, the business model of the newspaper industry at the end of the analog era. A perishable product made from expensive paper and ink, distributed top-down to a passive audience. Newspaper content is monetized in three ways: subscription, pay per copy, and ads. But most of the revenue, 80% of the revenue, comes from advertising. Half of that is retail advertising, and 40% of it is classified advertising. So, here is how they were doing with their analog audience. Unlike music, newspapers embraced the internet. They decoupled journalism from the physical object of the paper. They followed the digital audience online and were responsive to its values of choice, convenience, interactivity, and creativity. The newspaper industry saw that publishing once a day made no sense for a when I want it digital audience. So they made the expensive decision to become 24/7 producers of continuously updated multimedia content. The industry saw that the digital audience wanted to interact with media, so papers engaged in a conversation with them, invited and posted their comments, asked them to vote in polls and surveys. The industry saw that the audience was creative, wanted to produce as well as consume, so they invited readers to become citizen journalists, to tip them off to stories, to send them video of what was happening in their neighborhoods. Newspapers vowed not to make the same mistake as music. Unfortunately, they made a different mistake. They calculated that the core of their business model, advertising, would work on the internet the same as it had in print. They calculated that the best way to get the biggest online audience and the most advertising revenue was to give their content away for free. Imagine what might have happened instead if newspapers had started out online with a micropayment or a metered payment model, or if the rest of the industry had done what Dow Jones, almost alone, did with the Wall Street Journal and put its content behind a subscription wall. But they didn't. Instead, newspapers Napsterized themselves. Today, a generation of American news consumers who have only read newspapers online assumes that the natural and inevitable and only conceivable price point for journalistic content is nothing. The industry's calculation that online advertising would work as well as print advertising turned out to be a colossal mistake for three reasons. First, in the analog age, newspapers had a monopoly on classified ads for jobs, cars, housing, personals, buying and selling, and all the other commerce of the marketplace. But sites like Craigslist, eBay, Monster, Beep Beep broke that monopoly, and they innovated with pictures and interactivity and community rankings of sellers. Second, publishers thought that analog retail advertising would work online. But digital readers say they ignore ads. In a recent survey, an astonishing 79% of newspaper readers said they have never or rarely clicked on an online ad. And even if they radically underestimate the impact that online ads have on them, the metrics that papers use to calculate the impact of those ads are too primitive to justify higher rates. Third, there are profound differences between consuming information online and offline. A print newspaper is a bundle, a collection of news, opinion, sports, entertainment, and all the other elements that editors curate into a branded package that bearing the paper's distinctive personality and balance. But the digital audience unbundled newspapers into articles, and they decoupled articles from the identity and authority of their brands. Online readers use search engines to curate their own information and hyperlinks to jump from one story to another. Aggregators became the new brands. Moreover, the creative audience talks to itself, produces its own news and opinion to compete with professional journalism. Blogging and all the other forms of social media give anyone the power to create, edit, aggregate, market, and distribute information. Analog journalism is privileged discourse, but online newspapers are just another booth in the great digital bazaar, a noisy midway of news, music, videos, commerce, and every other kind of content, all of them clamoring for entertainment, for attention. So here's what happened when they made that gamble. Just since 2007, 165 American newspapers have stopped publishing, and about 15,000 reporters and editors have lost their jobs. Rupert Murdoch and Axel Springel think the enemy is Google, but Google only gives readers a few words and a link. It is the newspaper publishers, not Google, who killed their own industry. The digital audience did not demand free content. What it demanded was autonomy, controlling its own attention, a value that a purely market economy was unprepared to respect. If online readers had been asked to pay a fair price for journalism from the start, if the industry had tried the metered systems that the New York Times and Murdoch's British papers are only now adopting, or if an innovative system appropriate to a gift economy, like a new service called Kachingle, had been tried, then a new model for monetizing news might have been part of the online news culture from the beginning. Or maybe Apple has figured it out. One of the reasons iTunes worked was how cool the device, the iPod, was. Today, the iPad has that coolness. Maybe young people who can't imagine paying for web content would gladly pay for an app to read a newspaper or magazine online. And maybe some demographic groups, like adults, will prefer to pay for the comfort of a walled garden on the iPad than to fend for themselves in the wild west of the web. Today, when executives in the movie and television business look at the music and newspaper businesses, the question they ask is, will we be the next domino to fall? Start with movies. There are 7 movie studios in Hollywood, all but MGM part of vertically integrated global conglomerates that are also in businesses ranging from television, radio, music, and publishing to theme parks, mobile phones, e-commerce, and Broadway. The business model of the movie studios is based on the repeated marketing and distribution of the same content. They make money by selling and reselling the same intellectual property over and over, sometimes to the same consumer. They maximize revenue by cascading the movie through a sequence of media platforms and geographical territories that Hollywood calls the windows. Each window prices the product differently. So much for a movie ticket, so much for a DVD sale, so much for a rental, so much for a Blu-ray, so much for video on demand. The studios protect that pricing by adjusting the order and duration, and therefore the exclusivity of the windows. If you want to see it right now, here's what's available, and here's how much you'll have to pay. The sequence and timing of a movie's movement through those windows is determined by the highest marginal profit achievable in the least amount of time. Until recently, here's how it worked. Before a movie opens in theaters, there's an expensive marketing campaign to increase awareness and demand. Then there's the domestic theatrical release, a 4-month window of exclusivity. A month after domestic theatrical starts, the foreign theatrical window opens. Then there's a second expensive marketing campaign for DVDs. 4 months after the domestic theatrical, the domestic DVD window opens. A month later, the home video on demand window opens. The studio licenses the movie to cable operators and satellite providers. For a pay-per-view charge on top of your pay TV subscription, you can stream the movie on your TV. The foreign DVD window opens after the foreign theatrical exclusive. And then, anywhere between 2 and 15 months after the pay-per-view window, the studio licenses the movie to a cable or satellite channel that you pay a monthly premium for on top of your subscription. Ultimately, starting about 2 years after the theatrical release, the studio licenses the movie to commercial TV. The whole game of the movie business is controlling and protecting the sequence and exclusivity and duration and pricing of these windows. And of all the windows, there's one that the studios care the most about.